Hey, I'm Jeffrey Rickman, and this is PlainSpoken. This channel is for the benefit, especially of people who are connected with me in the Global Methodist Church. As many of you know, I spent the last few weeks very much centered around the United Methodist Church, out of which I came, focusing on their general conference and the developments there. And I'm going to continue to talk about stuff pertaining to the United Methodist Church and the Christian church more broadly, but I'm also needing to come back to the Global Methodist Church and try and build up my chosen covenant body. And so there is a convening conference coming up in September, not even in the United States. This is going to be a truly global conference, and a document was released on March 11th of 2024 called the Convening General Conference Community, Plan of Organization and Covenant for Our Life Together. So this is a document that is going to guide what is going to be taking place at the convening conference this September. If you're like me, you have a hard time just reading things through on your own. So this is going to be me and TJ reading through this. TJ, say hello to everybody.
Hi, everybody. It's been a while.
Yeah. TJ and I, if you don't know, we've gone through the entire transitional book of Doctrines and Discipline in its various iterations. We started, they've revised it over time. So it's still relevant, but not as relevant as it was. We've gone through that. We've started through the Judicial Practice and Procedure document, but it's time for us to focus on this because the deadline is coming up for submitting petitions, and everybody needs to be included as much as possible. So anything to say before we start reading, TJ?
I don't think so. I have not looked at this document at all. You can find it on their website. It's kind of hard to get to on their website. I'm not exactly sure how to get to it from there, but it's on there somewhere. It's easier if you just Google the name of the document. It's called I don't know, I was not paying attention, you probably said it, the Convening General Conference Community, Plan of Organization and Covenant for Our Life Together. So if you Google that, you can find it on their website.
Okay. And we are aware that there is a baby screaming in the background. That is my 2-year-old, and she does eventually stop, but I'm not stopping the recording. So, all right, we'll just do it the same format that we usually do it in the other segments that we've done, TJ. I'll read a paragraph, you'll read a paragraph. We'll read things along the way.
Sounds good.
Okay. So, here's the preface. Following the biblical admonition in Hebrews 12:15 and elsewhere, John Wesley early on encouraged his followers to, quote, watch over one another in love, first meeting with his brother Charles and a few other clergy in 1744 to consider, quote, how we should proceed to save our own souls and those that have hurt us, end quote. So Hebrews 12:15, if you're not familiar with this verse, says, looking diligently lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. So it's talking about the importance of watching over one another in love, and that's what the purpose of this gathering is. As the spiritual heirs of that tradition, the tradition of John Wesley and the people called Methodist, our goal is to peacefully work together for a common good of all in fulfilling the mission of the church. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ, we also aspire to follow the leading of the Holy Spirit in our conferencing, so TJ is going to look that up, and conform to God's will by experiencing God's transforming grace, and that's Romans 12:2. Within the community of the General Conference, thus, the following are established to spell out how we can best respond in obedience to God's will and go about our mission while still caring for all and making a bold witness for Christ to the world. So, TJ, what does that Acts reading say?
Acts 15:28, for it has seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay on you no greater burden than these requirements. And it goes into 29, that you abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols and from blood and from what has been strangled and from the sexual immorality. If you keep yourselves from these, you will do well.
So I think what it's focusing on there is just collective resolutions as to how it is that we're going to do the covenant community together. I think that's what, and then the Romans 12:2 passage says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So these are the orienting scriptures. That was 3 scriptures in the first paragraph to orient the
Good sign.
purpose. Yeah, it's a good sign of the General Conference. So, all right, next is the plan of organization, and TJ is going to take us through these different steps.
All right. Number 1 is opening session. The Global Methodist Church will hold its convening conference in the place and time recommended by the Commission on General Conference and set by the Transitional Leadership Council, or the TLC. Beginning with the time of worship, that's where it stops. The conference will then be called to order by a bishop designated by the TLC with the following order of business. Number 1, recognition of delegations and delegates by the Transitional Connectional Operating Officer. The official roll call will be completed by the registration process. Number 2, establishment of the voting bar of the conference. 3, report of the Commission on the General Conference. 4, adoption of the plan of organization and covenant for our community life as a conference by a 2/3 vote. Prior to adoption, the plan and covenant may be amended from the floor by a majority vote. Just go through all these and then go back and hit each one.
Yeah.
Okay. 5, election of the General Conference Secretary upon nomination of the TLC. That is in paragraph 605.2, Plan 4. 6, adoption of the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline as the starting document outlining the governing principles and systems of the Global Methodist Church, subject to all amendments and additions as approved by the Convening General Conference. At the end of the conference, the Book of Doctrines and Disciplines will be adopted as amended by majority vote and will no longer be considered transitional. Number 7, adoption of the proposed limited agenda of the convening conference, including worship services, special presentations, and specific paragraphs in the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines, which are open to amendment or change as spelled out below. Additional paragraphs or topics may be considered by a 2/3 vote of the General Conference delegates. And finally, 8, miscellaneous business.
So this document is stipulating how it is that the whole thing is going to start off,
Right.
what the basic order of events is going to be, but then it kind of zooms out. What is the overall business of the General Conference? What additional things can be done and added in? What is going to become clear? And I've read this document once a couple months ago, but they're not going to be revising the entire Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline. There's only a few sections that they're going to make sure fit, and then there's going to be another General Conference in a couple of years where they solidify the rest of what will be the Book of Doctrines and Discipline.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, because if we're going to go through the entire thing and nitpick every little thing, it would be, you wouldn't really be able to do much else. Like I feel like that requires one specific conference by itself, and that's all you're doing.
Yeah, it'd be like a prolonged constitutional month-long Congress. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Also, they're not wanting, a lot of people watched the live stream of the United Methodist Church's plenary, and they said, is this how the Global Methodist Church is going to do business? And a lot of GMC people got on my stream and said, no, there's going to be much more worship. It is not going to be as business worldly oriented. So they are probably still going to have Robert's Rules of Order, but they're not going to be focused on doing business the same way. It remains to be seen exactly how they're going to avoid all the pitfalls of the minutia that you saw in the UMC. But even so, one of the things they're going to do is just limit the amount of material covered. Right. We'll see what those sections are. Anything to focus on pertaining to any of these steps, clarifying questions or?
If I haven't been to a whole lot I haven't been to any general conferences. I've been to annual conferences, but it seems like it's pretty, number one, they're going to get up there and they're going to say, okay, here's who all's here, right? Is that how I read that?
Well, in establishing the bar of the conference is establishing
who's voting.
where do you have to be to vote,
Right.
and who is voting? If you're outside of this area, you cannot vote. If you're not credentialed, you cannot vote. And it sounds really unnecessary until you got people who try to vote who shouldn't vote.
Oh yeah, and I feel like here's where you can vote is more like if you're doing like hands or somebody's calling out, so you don't have random people in there. But I mean, a lot of it's digital now, so you've got your little thing that you've got, and you got your password, and you type in the. I mean, very rarely do they. I say very rarely. They still do it, but it's not as often that they do. Raise your hands. Who's all voting? Kind of thing.
Yeah, I haven't heard anybody talk about it, but it does seem quite cold. I can't imagine that anybody likes the digital method. It's cool, I guess, but there's always complications. Oh, it's not working for me. And
yeah, I'm not going to get into that.
Anything else to say on this
ageist.
section before we move along?
I don't really think so. I mean, yeah, there's nothing really that jumps out at me. It's just like, okay, here's the overall plan of how we're going to do this.
This is something where if you have litigious people in, there's already things that they can grab and delay the business of the conference. So here's a prayer to go ahead and be saying, pray that litigious people do not get sent here. So, all right, let's go to section 2 on presiding officers. I got a short section again. All plenary sessions of the General Conference will be guided by the active and bishops emeritus. Active bishops and bishops emeritus of the GMC as assigned by the Committee on Agenda, which is in paragraph 605.1. Legislative committees will be convened by one of the bishops in order to elect a chair, vice chair, and secretary who will then preside over committee meetings. So there's already been a secretary established, recommended by people before the General Conference. And then at the General Conference, all these sessions are going to be guided by bishops. I think this is, I wrote here, is there going to be a parliamentarian? Prior to this last General Conference for the UMC, I thought that having a professional parliamentarian would be really helpful. But then the guy they hired for the UMC was terrible. He was not much help at all. So maybe that's something that is not needed. But then it talks about legislative committees, and if you didn't watch the General Conference of the UMC, you don't necessarily know what these are. But you can't address every single petition on the floor of plenary. It would just take forever, so you need to have different work groups that review the petitions submitted and then make recommendations to the plenary. So if they do it exactly the same, then they'll establish a certain margin, it might be stipulated here, by which it has to pass the legislative committee. And if enough people like it, you don't even have to review it on the floor of plenary. You can just adopt it all in what's called a consent calendar, which is like an omnibus bill.
Okay, so I got a general idea of how this works. Plenary is everybody together.
That's right.
Okay, and then you've got all these petitions that come forward, and they go to smaller groups first.
Legislative committees, yes.
The legislative committees. They vote on whether it'll actually go to everybody.
Yes.
And then it's got to pass by a certain margin. And I guess they did have the option to review or go over things that didn't leave those committees.
You could, if a committee shut it down, a legislative committee shut it down, you could revive it on the floor of plenary. This is at the United Methodist General Conference. Right. You could revive it on the floor of plenary by 20 delegates. I don't know what they'll cover it here. How many delegates have to sign on and say we want to consider it? And then in legislative committee, if something isn't a slam dunk, but it still passes, they'll decide what those margins are. Then it'll automatically come to plenary where they will debate it on the floor.
Okay. And then these legislative committees, they'll be convened by one of the bishops in order to elect a chair, vice chair, and secretary for those committees. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then that says see below, so we'll get to that. So the bishop is going to be selecting those people that are in the committee. Like who gets to choose who's in these legislative committees?
All plenary sessions will be guided by the bishops. Legislative committees will be convened by one of the bishops in order to elect a chair, vice chair, and secretary who will then preside. Okay, so it says elect. So the fact that it doesn't say select or nominate, it says to me that the bishops are going to lead a nomination and election process in each legislative committee. So the bishop will call a legislative committee together and say, okay, we need a leader. Who do y'all want to nominate?
Sure.
Okay, let's vote on that. Then a vice chair, then a secretary, and then the bishop can leave or disengage because now he has...
Right, I'm just trying to think of, like, he calls those people, but are there... How are those people selected? Not the vice chair. Like, that's the group that gets together that elects those, but who gets to pick that group?
Oh, like who's in the actual legislative committee?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't recall it spelling it out here. In the United Methodist Church, people sign up, the different delegates sign up and say, I want to be on this committee or this committee. They have committees that handle...
Specific, like, types of legislative or
Exactly.
not legislative, but
Yeah.
petitions or...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that, like, one is I really want to speak to ordained ministry and how that works. So put me on that legislative committee. And then there will be, I don't know if it's going to be John Lomperis as the general secretary of the General Conference. I forget what his title is. I don't know if he divvies up people because you are going to have to just assign some people that signed up for another one, but that one's full.
Sure. Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But in general, the way it's going to work is, well, I can't speak confidently, but if they utilize, I think it makes sense to put people in the place that they want to be, right?
Yeah, because they're apt to be more interested in it, I would think so, and pay attention. Like, if you get put on a committee you don't want to be in, then you're just going to be resentful and hate
if you're petty. But I mean,
Yeah, maybe.
Even if everybody's spiritually mature, they're just not going to be able to be as engaged or
Sure.
care
Yeah,
as
if it's
much,
something
you know?
if it's something I'm not interested in, I'm not going to care as much.
Yeah.
So, okay.
All right. I guess take us a bit further.
All right. 3, Commission on the General Conference. Prior to the Convening General Conference, the TLC will have appointed a commission to oversee the preparations and recommended the optimal time and place for the conference. The commission will also recommend to the TLC the total number of delegates, as well as recommend the formula for the equitable allocation of delegates to the entire global church and to coordinate logistical arrangements for the successful operation of the conference.
So this has all already taken place. For those who are just now joining us on this series, who haven't been a part of, who don't know much about the denomination, the TLC stands for Transitional Leadership Committee. That is a crew of about 20 people that have been leading the entire denomination this whole time. The Chief Connectional Officer is Keith Boyette, who's leading in that capacity until after the General Conference ends. TLC is making a lot of these judgment calls. They've already decided how many delegates there are going to be. They've decided where it's going to be. And then this is the document granting them authority to do so. And there is also authority in the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines. So I don't know the things. I know that it's supposed to be in Costa Rica or Puerto Rico. I always get those two confused. It's Costa Rica, isn't it?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was Central America. It wasn't an island, right?
I should know.
GMC.
It's been a minute since I thought about it. See if you can find the total number of delegates as well. But right now, the annual conferences have been given their apportioned number of delegates, and they are in the process of nominating and electing them. So the Heartland Annual Conference is going to be figuring this out in a couple weeks, and I'm supposed to be there to help them.
Costa Rica. San Jose.
Okay.
That is September 20th through the 26th of this year, which is 2024.
All right. I would tell you to find out how many delegates there are, but did you just read 3 or did I just read 3?
I read 3.
Okay, so you can look it up while I'm reading, actually.
Sounds
so
good.
Go ahead and do that. This is section 4 on the Secretary of the General Conference. Prior to the General Conference, the TLC will appoint an acting secretary. At the opening session of the General Conference, the TLC will nominate and the delegates will elect the Secretary of the General Conference. The Secretary will be accountable to the Commission on the General Conference, working closely with the presiding bishops and the TLC. The Secretary, assisted by volunteer or paid staff, will be responsible for implementing the daily agenda and for coordinating the work of the legislative committees in dealing with the petitions and resolutions, working with the Commission on the General Conference The Secretary will initiate procedures to prepare all delegates for full participation in the General Conference by providing information concerning both the operation of the General Conference and materials it will consider. In addition, the Secretary will oversee the work of the administrative committees of the General Conference, serving as an ex officio member as indicated below. This position may be a paid staff position. If the position of Secretary becomes vacant in between General Conference sessions, the Connectional Council will elect a successor to serve until the next session. So that's a pretty intense position, actually, as we saw in the United Methodist General Conference, coordinating, just the task of coordinating and equipping all of the delegates is super intense because remember, there are going to be global, it's not just English speaking.
Right.
There are going to be people speaking different languages. You need to make sure, just on the first day of the UMC's General Conference, there were French speaking delegates that had English materials at their desk and they didn't have French materials. So it's something that it's a person who can major in the minors and the majors. This is a position that apparently it can be paid or volunteer. It goes for not just conference session, but all the time in between.
Yeah, it seems like a full-time position.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I can't imagine trying to do this as a volunteer thing.
No, that'd be awful.
It implements the daily agenda. That's very difficult for the General Conference. So I'm glad it stipulates they need help.
Yeah.
And you can pay the help. They need help to do this. They coordinate, they implement the daily agenda for the legislative committees in dealing with petitions. Okay, so one of the questions I had was, are we going to continue to have resolutions in the Global Methodist Church? And it would seem that we are. Within the United Methodist Church, they have the Book of Discipline, which all the petitions get into, but then you have resolutions that are made that are not binding, but they state like the position of the church with respect to any number of issues. And so I wondered if we were going to be making resolutions, and it would seem that we are.
So like social resolution. I mean, I guess I'm not really opposed to that. I mean, you can get it. Yeah, I'm not opposed to that, even though they can get annoying.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and if they keep it in proper measure, it can be fine.
When I say annoying, I'm thinking of the UMC stuff specifically. So.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Everybody knows. Everybody's annoyed, except for them, of course.
Before you go on, you wanted me to find out how many delegates there are.
Yeah.
As of March 4th of this year, 2024, the TLC approved an allocation of 260 delegates. But it says a second allocation of delegates will be announced shortly after June 1st of 2024 to ensure fair representation for new provisional annual conferences or districts that join the GMC Church between March and June. So there's 260 right now. If there's any more people that join, any more churches that join, any more annual conferences that join, they'll add more.
Or they'll just give additional delegates to those already established. If what I assume is they're going for a total body size of around 500. And so they just wanted to do an initial delegate or divvying up, but then they have a certain size that they're aiming at to get up to that number. It would seem to me.
Sure.
Yeah. So anyway, today's May 9th. So here in about 4 weeks, they should be putting out a statement about how many more and where they will come from.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Was there anything else on the Secretary of the General Conference?
Let's go back over daily agenda. Works with the Commission on General Conference. So we've covered that commission on our Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines series and what they do. Secretary will initiate procedures preparing delegates for full participation. That's going to be so intense. Provide information concerning both operation of General Conference. Oh my gosh, pray for this person. Go ahead and start praying for this person. So wait, they're not going to elect this person until the conference begins? Did I read that correctly? No, it says prior to the General Conference, TLC will appoint. So this is not going to be an elected person at General Conference. This is going to be someone. Oh, is this John Lomperis' position? It probably is. Pray for John Lomperis.
I'm trying to look that up right now.
The Secretary of the General Conference. That's what the title should be. So, Yeah, he can major in the majors and the minors. He's the perfect person for this job. Yeah, if it's not him, I have no idea who it would be. Well, and when it says that the secretary will oversee the work of the administrative committees of the General Conference, serving as an ex officio member, then that starts to sound like the chief connectional officer position, Keith Boyette's position. Because the administrative committees of the General Conference are those things that are in operation in between sessions. And so if they're overseeing all of them and serving as an ex officio member, then that sounds like the chief connectional officer. This position may be a paid staff position, it says, though. So, no, it would seem that it's someone else. If the position of the secretary becomes vacant, then the connectional council will elect a successor. So the connectional council is what replaces the TLC after General Conference. There's still going to be a small group that is making judgment calls for the denomination. So, yeah, this is a confusing position. I'm not sure exactly. It doesn't sound like it is the chief connectional officer. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I can't find any news articles that they post that says anything about it other than on their website. It has listed under staff John Lomperis as the General Conference Business Manager. So I don't know. That sounds kind of like the Secretary of the General Conference, but I'm not 100% sure because it's not. Maybe they're just using the wrong name. Then it's also got Lamar Oliver as General Conference Petitions Secretary. So those are the only General Conference positions it looks like they've got on there.
I'm sorry we don't have a better understanding of this, guys. We'll make sure to correct this on the next. We'll get clear on this and get clear on the next episode. So for now, we need to move on. I think it's your turn to read, isn't it?
It is. We are on 5. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. 5 committees of the General Conference. A, administrative committees. Number 1, an agenda committee will be composed of 8 delegates, half clergy and half lay from across the global church, as well as the chairs of each legislative committee and the secretary of the General Conference, who will be an ex officio member. The committee will prepare the daily order of plenary sessions, including the consideration of those petitions identified by each legislative committee as having the highest priority for conference action. They will also select the presiding officer for each plenary session. The agenda will be set in such a way as to rotate through each committee one such priority item at a time, with the allowance that related petitions with one area may be considered at the same time. The committee will announce at the close of each plenary session a tentative agenda for the subsequent session. Anything to say on that?
I was trying to figure out who's out in the hallway by listening to it, so I wasn't even paying attention. I'm sorry. So the agenda committee, there's 8 people. They're operating during General Conference.
These okay, administrative committees are different from legislative committees.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the agenda committees. Obviously, they're going to make up the agenda for each day.
Yeah.
So there's a whole committee of people that do that.
And then they select the presiding officer for each plenary session. So I think the presiding officers are going to be bishops.
Yeah.
So they just decide which. This is one of the really frustrating things about the United Methodist General Conference was a number of their bishops were no good. They were terrible.
Right, yeah.
The worst I've ever seen was David Graves just this last
Was he?
time. Oh, and he's presided over his own annual conference several times.
I remember seeing that. I don't think there's anything else to say on that.
Okay, well then take us to number 2.
Number 2 is the Credentials Committee. Will be composed of 8 delegates, half clergy, half lay from across the global church, who will consult with the secretary of the General Conference and decide on all matters dealing with the approval of credentials and the seating of delegates. Okay, so there's a whole committee that just says, these are the people that are supposed to be here. Here's where you're supposed to sit, and your credentials are good.
Pretty much, yeah, and you would think that that's real easy, but it was so hard for the United Methodist ones that they couldn't get fully a quarter of the African delegates there.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
And when they were asked to report on it, gave a very resentful report. So,
they had to report on it. I guess I didn't watch all of their live streams.
yeah, well, who could?
I'm sure there were a lot of people that did.
Yeah, no, they it's a very important thing. So this will operate before. Well, no, this is only operating during. Well, no,
It doesn't specifically say. It says it's just here's who it's going to be composed of, and I would assume that's beforehand.
How could they do their job if they're not active beforehand? Yeah. So apparently they're going to be constituting these beforehand.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it would be a disaster if they're just like, okay, we got everybody here. Let's set up a committee to tell everybody where they're going to sit and make sure that they're actually supposed to be here. So
I don't remember. Do they even talk about how it is that they? Oh yeah, membership of the administrative committees. They will be nominated by. Okay, we'll get there in a second.
Okay.
So they just wanted to tell us about the committees before telling us how they were going to put them together.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Number 3, a reference committee will be composed of 8 delegates, half clergy, half lay, from across the global church, who will refer all petitions and resolutions received to the appropriate legislative committees. So you got a committee that takes in all of the petitions and resolutions and then passes them out to the appropriate committees, legislative committees.
I'm so glad I'm doing this with you, buddy. You're better at this than I am. Okay.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm not
You're doing
reading
great.
this incorrect.
Okay.
4, a courtesies committee will be composed of 8 delegates, half clergy, half lay, from across the global church, who will consider resolutions for commendation, courtesy, or appreciation submitted by delegates for presentation to the plenary session, as well as special guests who may be invited to address the conference. Okay, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so when you're doing business, if all you're doing is Robert's Rules of Order, making your way through different stuff, and it becomes very stilted and formal and impersonal. And so I've always understood this committee responsible for changing up the pace so that people still feel like they're interpersonally relating to one another in the content of what they're doing. So there are people that can get up on the floor and have a moment of personal privilege, talking about the work that they're doing or just how great it is or whatever. Talk about whatever they want. You can grant anyone a point of personal privilege at any point, but sometimes it's good to have it coordinated.
Okay, so this committee is... Somebody submits, hey, I want to have my point of personal privilege. I want to talk about something during general conference. They would submit it to
like
this.
We have a legislative petition that we really want people to understand better. Could we please present this so that it's not just the dry language of the petition?
Okay.
So this can be used to very much manipulate a body.
Sure, yeah. But I guess there's a reason it's there.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense. So who would you go to if you wanted to talk? Are you just going to get up on the floor in the middle of something and then they're just going to call it out of order? So it makes sense that you'd go to a committee and they would
And you can ask for a moment of personal privilege. According to Robert's Rules of Order, you can ask for a moment of personal privilege and the chair can grant it to you. But one of the exceptional things about the United Methodist General Conference that just concluded was in all previous years, they did allow that. This was the first year that they said, nope, go through the committee and they'll say what you want to say for you. And so when Jerry Kula came up and said, why'd you guys do this? They said, here's what's in the book. Go sit down. It was really not great. So, all right, go on to the journal committee.
All right, number 5, a journal committee will be composed of 3 delegates plus the secretary of the general conference, who will approve the daily proceedings as well as reconcile all petitions which are passed by the conference with other provisions within the Book of Discipline. Doctrines of Discipline.
Super nerdy position. You only need 3 super nerds, and they put the whole journal together and organize all the information.
Okay, so this is the document that they're getting that says, okay, here's the tentative list of everything that's going to happen. Here's here's the petitions and whatever.
Well, and this is what happened. This is how, when the vote was taken, how many people voted, by what margin it passed.
So this is going to be some kind of like a digital document that goes out. Surely they're not going to print it every day.
Yeah, so in the United Methodist Church, they have what's called the Daily Christian Advocate that they publish every day with but no, after the general conference, there should be a journal published that documents everything said and done by this assembly for historical record and for a reference point as they're moving forward.
Okay, so this is one document beforehand and then after, or there's going to be updated document every day?
I would imagine there's an updated document every day, but it'll be subject to revision and correction, but then there will be a final document afterwards called the journal.
Okay, so 3 people and the secretary of the General Conference will be in charge of putting this together.
Absolutely.
Okay, number 6. A nominations committee will be composed of 8 delegates, half clergy, half lay from across the global church, who will nominate a slate of persons to serve as members of the various general church commissions and councils. Okay.
It's just a nominations crew.
Give me an example of a general church commission.
I'm sure there's been a list of general commissions and I'm sure I've seen it. I just had a hard time holding on to it. Within the United Methodist Church, they have 13 general commissions, one aimed at interreligious concerns, one aimed at lifting up women in the body, one looking at, these are not ones that are going to be in the GMC. There might be an ecumenical one. They have like the ones responsible for education. That might be something.
Gotcha.
Or like ministry standards. That might be one, or minimum pay, certain things that you want to be figured out and responsive in between sessions of the general conference.
Gotcha. So the nominations committee is responsible for nominating these people, and then the general conference then decides whether to elect those people or not.
It sounds that way. Although I can't imagine that we will. Maybe we will at General Conference vote on all of the people that are going to work for the general commissions and councils. That would be interesting. That would be a change. Is that not how
it works in the UMC?
No, in the UMC, it's like a permanent ruling bureaucracy that is hired privately. So that's why it all got one of reasons why it all got co-opted was it's the swamp.
I was going to say they didn't learn from the United States government. Good job, UMC.
they intentionally modeled the United Methodist Church off of the
which I mean kind of makes sense. But ideally, if you're getting together every 4 years, like you would be able to adjust. Like, oh, that's not a good thing. Let's change that, and that would be one of the things I would think they would change. So don't be like that, GMC.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's go on to the next section. This is B, membership of the administrative committees. Members of the administrative committees will be nominated by each delegation at least 60 days prior to the conference and elected by the TLC out of the pool of nominees for the convening general conference, taking care to ensure representation across the geographical regions of the church. For subsequent general conferences, nominations will be made to the connectional council for their election. Membership on an administrative committee does not prevent the person from serving on a legislative committee. Okay, so we'll get to legislative committees in a second. For these administrative committees, each annual conference is going to have its set of delegates, all of them together as a delegation. They will nominate people on their delegation for these administrative committees. The TLC is going to review all of them and then decide who's actually going to serve on what administrative committee, making sure that they get a wide representation internationally. So This is not DEI. This is just making sure a global church operates globally.
Right.
And then for subsequent general conferences, nominations are not going to go to the TLC, but now there's going to be a connectional council. It's going to be the same deal.
Okay, so annual conferences say, here's how many delegates we're sending.
Here's what we think this one would be good for.
Yeah, okay. And then they nominate them for these various administrative committees. And then the TLC for the first general conference is going to be the ones that choose them. And then for everyone after that, the connectional council will then say, okay, yeah, these people are going to this. And even if you're in an administrative committee, you can still be in a legislative committee.
Exactly. Yeah, okay. The administrative committees, it looks like, are going to be doing a lot of their work around sessions, but during session, they should be able to participate in legislative committees.
Right. Okay. And then those are all supposed to be done 60 days to 60 days before the general conference. Okay. C, legislative committees. 7 legislative committees. We were just in administrative committees, so this is legislative. 7 legislative committees will be established for the Convening General Conference, each composed of no more than 65 persons, half lay, half clergy from across the global church, with a minimum of 30 persons for each committee. Okay. You got
Between
7.
30 and 65.
30 and 65. Okay. Okay. Fair enough. The Convening General Conference will have a limited agenda in order to allow time for the most significant decisions to be made affecting the development of the Global Methodist Church and to allow more input at the subsequent general conferences from congregations and areas across the world that may not yet be an official part of the GMC. Okay, so part of the reason they're trying to keep it small is just in case, or not go over the entire book of discipline like with a fine-tooth comb, is because potentially there's going to be a lot more people that join, a lot more areas that join, and they want them to have input with all this stuff. We just don't want to get it done right off the bat, and it'd be an American thing because the majority of GMC is America right now.
Pretty smart, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Petitions related to paragraphs not listed in the limited agenda will be referred to the next general conference for consideration, unless by a 2/3 vote of the convening or of the 2/3 vote the conference agrees to take them up. Okay, fair enough. Such petitions will not be translated before the convening general conference. The petition committee established by the Transitional Leadership Council will publicly report the disposition of each submitted petition, along with the rationale for its disposition: accepted, not accepted, referred.
Wait, just a second. The petitions committee established by the TLC, okay, will publicly report the disposition of each submitted petition. So there's a committee, the petitions committee is going to review each and every petition and say whether they like it or don't like it, or it might be okay, but we're not going to consider it this time.
They didn't even go over petitions committee, did they? That wasn't one of the options. There's a agenda committee, a credentials committee, a reference committee.
Well, those are the administrative committees, so maybe this is no?
This is a hold on.
Maybe is this all legislative committees?
It's got them listed out. Yeah, so in the next paragraph, we're getting the Conference Legislative Committee, the Connectional Organization Legislative Committee, the Constitutional Legislative Committee, the Episcopacy and Superintendent Legislative Committee, Financial Administration's Legislative Committee. I cannot.
Okay, so this is not among all those committees.
Yeah, so I don't know where this committee comes from.
That's interesting. Okay, well, maybe it'll be further on in the document, but there is going to be a petitions committee that is established by the TLC and reviews all of the petitions and reviews them. That's interesting. Here, go a bit further. Let's see if we get more clarity on this.
In addition to the agenda listed under each legislative committee, the General Conference agenda will include the ability of any legislative committee to recommend forming working groups or task force to develop proposals for future general conferences. The agenda will also include the ability to pass petitions that make editorial changes to parts of the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline that are not otherwise considered part of the agenda. Such editorial petitions do not open those non-agenda paragraphs to other amendments without the 2/3 votes of the General Conference.
So what I hear it addressing is they're trying to demarcate where the conversation can be, but the assembly of the General Conference can still go outside of those bounds with a 2/3 vote. There might be some things that need to change that are contingent upon other parts of the Book of Discipline changing, but if they're out of bounds, you can still go out of bounds with 2/3 of the people saying, yeah, we need to figure this out.
Okay, I'm glad you understood it.
I'm not sure I understood it. This is just me trying to fit it together, but this is,
I'd have to read over that a couple of times before I completely understand it. I guess this is just pertaining to stuff that's not accepted or not addressed during the first general conference, and it's going to happen, or is passed on to the next general conferences.
That's where the second part the second part dealt with those things that go out of bounds of what's been said. The first part there's going to be working groups and task forces to develop proposals for future general conferences. So there's going to be like different types of permanent or semi-permanent bodies that are established at the general conference.
At least until the next general conference, which I assume they're dissolved at that point, and then they would decide if they want to make their own or continue those, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know.
But that wouldn't make, I mean, the idea of those work groups is to address specific petitions that weren't addressed in general conference. So,
okay.
At least that's what I'm getting. So their job is to get it all in order for the next one.
Okay.
And ideally, they take care of it in the next one.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good. So it's not just don't think about these things, don't talk about these things. It's okay. We're going to design a way forward to move forward on these things.
Yeah.
Even if we can't address it at this session.
Here are the things that we didn't get to. We'll get to them the next time, and they're not just going to get swept under the rug and disappear somewhere.
Okay, I like it. I like it. Okay. You want me to take the committees?
Have at it.
Okay, here's number one, the conference's legislative committee. It'll establish or approve the boundaries and names of annual conferences, as well as the formula allocating delegates to the general conference and the possibility of the creation of regional conferences. It will review petitions relating to the following paragraphs within the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline. Paragraphs 522, 523, 604, 609, 612, 613, and Part 6 editorial. So we're not going to go through each of these paragraphs and what they pertain to. This is something that you have to do on your own time. They do have free copies of the most updated Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline when you go to www.globalmethodist.org. You can do it, or you can just do a Google search.
Yeah, they're easy to find on their website. Yeah, it's under documents or something along those lines. That's really easy to find.
Okay. The second committee. Oh wait, so this committee needs to meet though long before conference session. Well, no. Never mind. Okay, let's go to number two. The Connectional Organization Legislative Committee will consider the process for nominating officers for the General Conference, as well as the establishment and work of ongoing commissions. It will review petitions relating to the following paragraphs: paragraph 605, 607, and all of Part 7, including the editorial. Okay, so the first committee dealt with boundaries and names of annual conferences and how delegates get allocated. Second one is figuring out who's going to serve in the general conference, officers for general conference, as well as establishment of ongoing commissions. So there are going to be permanent positions, staff associated with this, and then ongoing commissions that come out of this. So this is going to deal with paragraph 605, 607, and all of Part 7.
Yeah, I guess I'm not clear. These would have to be set up before general conference. At least the first one for sure, because if you're approving boundaries of annual conferences and got a formula and establishing a formula for delegates, then that has to be done before you can go to general conference, because then how do you know who's supposed to go to general conference?
So what I started thinking was right now the TLC has done that, but then these legislative committees get established to take over that function afterwards. That would make sense to me.
Well, then these would be permanent committees that are set up.
It sounds that way unless they're wanting to determine these things during general conference session to apply to the next time, but that wouldn't make any sense. So yeah, this would have to be if you're going to be establishing the boundaries and names of annual conferences, and especially allocating delegates, you would want to do that 6 months before general conference,
right,
each time. So yeah, that indicates to me that this would be a committee that meets outside of general conference session beforehand.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess. I'm not that familiar with the UMC General Conference and how it was set up, so maybe this is more familiar to people that have been through that and are kind of familiar with that process, which I'm not.
Yeah, we're gonna see. We'll get more clarity on this. A lot of people will write us and correct us on things.
Yeah, hopefully you've got comments for a reason.
The third legislative committee is going to be the Constitution Legislative Committee. It will oversee the writing of a constitution for the GMC for presentation and adoption by the General Conference. It will review petitions relating to the following paragraph within the TBDD, paragraph 301, and parts of 1 and 2.
Yeah, so that's something that definitely is not going to be done right on the fly at General Conference. That's something that would have to be done beforehand. You're going to write a whole constitution?
Yeah, they've already submitted a draft constitution.
Okay.
I've seen it. I don't remember when and where they gave it out, but yeah, this has already been drafted and submitted for the consideration of delegates.
Okay.
Okay. Fourth one is the Episcopacy and Superintendency Legislative Committee. It'll consider matters such as the question of a general or residential superintendency, episcopal compensation, the process for the election and assignment of bishops, including term limits, episcopal area boundaries, and the establishment of a Global Episcopacy Committee. It will review petitions relating to the following paragraphs: 502, 03, 04, 05, 09, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 21, and the Part 5 editorial. So this is another thing that has already been written up and submitted for consideration. They're going to have a temporary system for the episcopacy recommended for 2 years, and then there will be another general conference after 2 years where they adopt a final format, hopefully, for how to deal with the episcopacy.
There's going to be another general conference in 2 years? Is that what I heard you say?
I'm pretty sure I'm remembering that correctly.
Okay.
Yeah, this was something 3 weeks ago. I had Chris Ritter. I did an interview with him because, yeah, they had a task force on the episcopacy where they weren't able to make a firm decision on how we were going to do things. So they came up with, okay, we'll do things this way for 2 years. Then we'll have a general conference where we come up with a more permanent way of doing it.
Wait for other areas, annual conferences to come on board, and then they can help with the decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are a lot of people who are willing to not join based on how we do bishops. So I think they're just
First
saying,
off, yeah, so.
we will include you in this conversation. We'll figure it out together.
Okay. 2 years, I feel like that's long enough. 4 years would be weird to me.
Yeah.
That seems too long.
The whole thing has been weird. I mean, so the fact that we're only just now doing a lot of this stuff, there are a lot of people in the UMC or outside of the UMC who said, you guys aren't even a real denomination yet because you haven't had a convening conference. So we're doing the bare minimum at least to be a real annual conference. So let's go on to the fifth one. Financial Administration Legislative Committee will give oversight to connectional funding matters and caps, delegation of budgeting to the Connectional Council, as well as implementing the Ministerial Training Fund. It will review petitions relating to the following paragraphs within the Book of Discipline, 349, 411, and Part 9 editorial. So, connectional funding matters and caps, delegation of budgeting to the Connectional Council, implementing the Ministerial Training Fund. So it's the money one.
Makes sense.
Okay.
No input on that.
Great. The sixth one is the Judicial Administration Legislative Committee. It will revise paragraphs relating to complaints against clergy and bishops, assigning responsibility to conference boards of ministry and a Global Episcopacy Committee, as well as revise the judicial practices and procedures referred to in paragraph 802. It will review petitions relating to the following paragraphs within the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline, paragraph 520, and all of Part 8, including the editorial. So we would point you to the TBDD series that we've done. We've also been covering judicial practice and procedures. It is an intense thing that has required all of us. Yeah,
it's a lot.
Yeah. So there's going to be a legislative committee responsible for overseeing that. And then finally, the seventh one is the Ministry and Local Church Legislative Committee. It will consider the educational requirements for ordination, create a mechanism to ensure that ministry candidates can be voted upon individually rather than in a block, revise procedures for the approval of chaplains and evangelists, define the membership standards, and designate the body responsible for upholding congregational fidelity. It will review petitions relating to the following paragraphs within the Book of Doctrines and Discipline, 322, 354, 355, 407, 409, 410, 413, 414, 419, and parts of 3 and 4 editorial.
I do like that they're in charge of creating a mechanism to ensure that ministry candidates can be voted upon individually rather than a block. I saw that. Yeah, I don't like that they do it in a block. I think that's stupid.
So that's the way that some United Methodist annual conferences have done it.
Oh yeah,
it wasn't stipulated in the Book of Discipline, but yeah, that's how they got some gay candidates through in Florida after they tried it before, and they withheld the whole block because of some gay candidates in there. So this is something that I've actually been asked to craft, and so I'll be submitting some legislation to that effect, because just the fact that it's in this document doesn't mean it's going to happen. So you have to actually submit. I should have the text of the petition for everybody to. I have to get 20 people to sign on with me, I think. So I'll get that number next week, hopefully, and just so it's known, I intend to have some other petitions that are submitted, and I need y'all to sign on with me if you like it. So I'll be presenting those. But yeah, you're right. The fact that they put that in writing, we're not going to repeat some of the same mistakes as the UMC.
Well, and ideally, if you're voting on people individually, you've got to know something about them. So is there going to be some kind of like information presented to, like, okay, here's this person, you can pull up their bio or whatever and find out what education they've got, where they've served, all of this kind of stuff before you actually vote on them.
That's something that you and I have talked about, some kind of database that people can have access to, and I'm hoping to submit something on that, but I think it'll make a lot of people very uncomfortable.
Good. I mean, you're joining a body, like, you should be scrutinized a little bit. Like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, how many kids you got? How many, like, where's your address? Like, it's just, okay, where'd you go to school? Like, what are your, if I had a choice, it would be like, okay, you've got, you wrote papers in school. Let's see some of these papers.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Like, so you can defend, like, your beliefs. I mean, this is after they've gone through ordination, right? Or this is as they're about to be ordained. Like, they've been going through the process, but they're not ordained yet. Okay, so they're not actually ordaining. This is the general conference, so they're not ordaining people at general conferences. It'll be to trickle down to the annual conferences. This is the thing the annual conferences have to go by.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, criminal records should be a part of it as well.
Oh yeah,
obviously.
not even a question.
Yeah, but the thing will be, so the way that the United Methodist Church did it was they rubber stamped it. Right. They had committees and commissions responsible for it, Board of Ordained Ministry responsible for reviewing all this stuff.
We've got experts. Trust the experts.
Exactly. So hopefully one of the cultural differences between the GMC and the UMC is we no longer trust the committees to tell us what to do. Rather, the committees do the work, submit the information to us, keep the obviously crazy bad ones away, but then let us make decisions about every single person. Just give us the information we need to be a conciliar body making responsible decisions.
Yeah. Other than that, if you're not doing that, then you're just rubber stamping everything, and you're not actually voting for something. These people in these committees are doing it for you, and you're outsourcing it to people you probably don't even know.
So that's we'll continue to talk about this. We need to conclude this episode, so we made it a third of the way through, maybe a half, somewhere in there. We'll pick back up next week. Hopefully I'll have a petition or two to show you guys. And then I should go ahead and, it didn't have the date in here, but the date is closing to submit petitions. So if that is something that you want to do, then you should go ahead and be thinking on, okay, what do I want to add to this? Make sure it addresses these sections that are okay in this document. Go ahead and be in prayer for the convening conference. It's months away, but it's going to be very influential. And then, in the comments, let us know what we got wrong here, what insights you have that we were lacking. Just be gracious with us. We're doing this. Hopefully it's helpful to you, but we are not experts. And if you saw the coverage I gave to the United Methodist General Conference, it is my hope and expectation to do the same thing for the General Conference. I'm not going. I'm staying here from home. And it is my hope that consulting this and Robert's rules and the other things that I know, that I can lead you guys through the process and explain what's happening as it's happening, talk to people on the ground. So if you would like to make that work possible and help me do that, then consider going over to plainspoken.locals.com and funding the work that I'm doing. Hopefully I can bring in some people that can actually help me do a really good job for y'all. And then make sure to subscribe to me wherever you are so that you stay apprised of what's going on. So All right, TJ, say adios.
Adios. See you next week. Thanks for joining us.
All right, it's been fun. See y'all.